And joining us now is Johnathan Franks. He's the spokesperson for the Bring Our Families Home campaign. It's great to have you on the show. You think this is a good swap for the United States. Why?
Absolutely. Any day that we can bring an American home from captivity like this is a good day. And in exchange, we provided 5 Americans, right, who most Americans won't remember their names tomorrow, right? And we're going to let them spend some money of their own on food and medicine. And we save 5 American lives in the process. It's not a close call. This is the only moral decision.
Critics say this is going to encourage the kidnapping of more Americans. We hear this every time. We heard this when you were involved in getting Trevor Reed out of Russia. There's always the issue, and it's a real one, that if you reward these countries for holding innocent Americans in horrific conditions, that it will encourage other bad actors out there to do the same thing. Pluck up Americans off the street and hold them until they get what they want.
And I hear and fully understand the theoretical concern, but at the moment it's a theoretical concern. And even assuming it's true that making these deals does to some degree incentivize hostage taking, we can't prevent future hostage taking on the backs of our current detainees, right? We still have to bring our people home. And having spent the last, year and a half of my life pushing for more prisoner trades, I am resolutely convinced that the United States got the best of these deals.
The United States says we're not giving this $6 billion of Iranian funds back to Iran. It's not going back into Iranian bank accounts, despite, what some people are saying. And Iran is only allowed to spend this on humanitarian purposes. How are we going to make sure that happens and that this money isn't going to fund terrorism, for example?
Elizabeth, that's a great question. I'll plead guilty to not being a math person, so I'm not going to pretend to understand that which I don't. But I do have some faith in the Treasury Department in making sure that there are significant controls over this money.
The Biden administration says it's been working for 2 years on this deal. They say part of the problem and the reason it took so long was figuring out how they were going to track that money and make sure it was only used for food and medicine and agricultural purposes, humanitarian purposes. As I said at the top, you worked hard to get Trevor Reed released. Talk a little bit about what goes into these kinds of negotiations. This is not as simple as picking up the phone and saying, okay, let's make a deal.
It's not. I mean, theoretically it should be, but it's definitely not, although they can come together pretty quickly. In my experience, and I'm not going to pretend I know what it's like to be an official negotiating one of these, because I haven't been. But in my opinion, one of the first pieces to these trades, when I tell families whose loved ones could benefit from trades, you're going to have to sell your own government on the trade, right? We had to do that with Trevor. If you remember, his parents were on this network and every network I could find, making the case for a trade of Trevor for Yaroshenko and Whelan for Victor Bout.
So we know from Namazi, who was the longest held of the 5 hostages released, that he was in Iran visiting his parents when he was arrested. His lawyer says he was tortured, he was electrocuted, he was beaten, he was in that infamous Evin prison since 2015. Can you describe what happens to these prisoners when they finally do get back to American soil, as will happen later on tonight?
For sure. I think a lot of the time, remember, you're going from an environment in which you're told when to wake up, when to eat, when to go to the bathroom, when to move, when to not move, to an environment where you have free will again. And that can be a little bit disconcerting, might be the right word. I've had clients that came home before that, for instance, slept on the floor instead of their quite comfortable bed for a period of days or even weeks. It takes a minute to get back into sync with having your own free will. When you haven't been allowed to make any choices, all of a sudden, everyday life choices become harder.
Yeah, wow. It's a real human experience, a real human transition, fraught, I'm sure, with a lot of emotion for those American families. Johnathan Franks, Thanks so much for being with us tonight and explaining what that's like behind the scenes. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.